Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. We are continuing a class series on the development of modern holidays and modern festivities. Basically, how did we arrive at how we celebrate now over the period of syncretization and blending of various cultures and religions throughout time. In October, we began this series talking about how Samhain and All Hallow Tide developed into the modern celebration of Halloween. This series covers the evolution of the Roman holidays of Saturnalia, Sol Invictus, and the January Calends, and how they blended together into the Germanic celebrations around the period of Yule, and how that developed into Yuletide and Christmastide, and how that all eventually got to the modern celebration of Christmas. Unfortunately, I prepared an enormous amount of material for this class. I essentially wrote a book. It's currently something like 360 pages long. I'm actually still researching, fact-checking, and editing various sections of it, and it just keeps getting longer. It's enormous. Unfortunately, I'm obsessive, and there is an incredibly large amount of relevant history that I want to include. So there's no way I'm going to get this series done in time to have it completed by the date I'd originally decided was the end of it, which is December 25th. So I guess I'll have to record the rest of it next December. I don't even know if y'all will stick around for a year, but I'm gonna get through what I can. And that includes today's class, which is primarily on the hunt. So I say primarily because the wild hunt is one of the aspects of this holiday that I see wildly misportrayed in modern neo-pagan and pagan reconstructionist narratives around this holiday. In particular, I see people making claims that have no historical evidence to support them, and also I see people taking as fact and as ancient fact as that the writings of Christians from the 17 and 1800s about the wild hunt, and essentially saying this is this ancient, verifiable, historical narrative around the wild hunt, and it isn't. So I'm already anticipating the comments that I'm going to get and the emails I'm going to get, and as always, my sources are available upon request, and I am happy to give you the bibliography of this course series. I will warn you that right now, with only a third of the document fully completed and edited, my sources are 18 pages long. So, and that's just a list. It's just a list. It's not double spaced. So, okay, by all means. In fact, I encourage you to read everything that I read. Please do. Do that. I would like that. Before you come and tell me that this isn't the case. On that note.
Also, we ask that if you are going to argue with us, you please provide your own sources.
Yeah.
Preferably historical ones. Preferably first-person accounts.
So, as a reminder for this class series, almost everything that we know about the Germanic, I'll use the word pagan because that is how the Romans described them, but as a reminder, the origin of the word pagan is not what you think it is. Celebrations comes from a later era, so not from them themselves before the Christians arrived and influenced everything, but specifically from the records of the clergy that were writing about the celebrations that they witnessed, about the culture that they witnessed, and not always in an accurate or flattering way. The other means that we have for reconstructing this kind of thing is to observe the culture as it stands now and try to make guesses using cultural anthropology as to what the origins of how things are celebrated now actually were. Additionally, of course, there's archaeological evidence and oral history. So what if we ask the people now, what do they say? Which is one of the things that I have noticed is somewhat absent when neo-pagan and pagan reconstructionist people are writing these claims online as to Yule and how it was celebrated, or making images that they pass around in the occult groups on Facebook. I wish that they would read the records from the actual people, like read the prose edda, and maybe talk to someone. In particular, some of what I've been reading about Perkta, really, I'm just like, please join like the Ergloe group on Facebook, please. Maybe, and talk to some people who actually come from that culture and verify some of the claims you're making. Okay, but as always, it is certainly not only pagans or neo-pagans or pagan reconstructionists who are seemingly allergic to history. I'm also seeing some claims out of Christian Facebook groups that are alarming around the concept of the wild hunt. So let's get into what we do know from verifiable historic record about the wild hunt and what cultural anthropologists have interpreted based on this evidence. Scholars have connected the month to 2 month long event of the Yule period to celebrations and recognitions of the wild hunt. Belief in the wild hunt has persisted for centuries to modern day, and the first accounts that mention it have unfortunately been lost to the depths of time. The wild hunt seems based in beliefs that have deep roots in the mentality of Indo-European people. The wild hunt has assumed thousands of forms and multiple natures. Its innumerable variations are made more complicated by the fact that the belief is a still living tradition. People still believe in this. People whose ancestors believed in this for centuries before them. The narratives are made of an enormous body of knowledge that is inextricably tangled and fraught with controversy and misinterpretation. These stories are characterized by an extremely advanced syncretism and the synthesis of information from a wide variety of traditions, including pre-Christian traditions, Roman traditions, and Christian traditions. All of these cultures blended together their beliefs into the wild hunt, and they're still blending together these traditions to this day. It's still evolving. It's changing over time. Complicating any research on the wild hunt is the fact that witches, occultists, and neo-pagans and pagan reconstructionists have been spreading the false narrative of the history of the wild hunt for so long that many books on the history and folklore of the wild hunt just recite those very modern narratives as fact. To avoid making the same mistake as many other witches while documenting this history, we are going to start with a very simple definition of the Wild Hunt and then expand and expound upon it. The Wild Hunt is a band of otherworldly beings who make a passage over the earth during certain times of the year. This ride is marked by a series of phenomena by which it can be known that the hunt is riding. Beyond these elements, all else varies by culture, time, and religion. The makeup of the hunt, the appearance of its members, the presence or absence of animals, noise or silence marking its presence, the existence of a male or female lead rider who, depending on the country and the region, bears different names. The huntsman, the wild god, Woden, Wode, Mother Hulda, Dame Hol, Perkt or Perkta, Hennekin, the Welsh psychopomp Gwyneb Nudd, historical or legendary figures like Theodoric the Great, the Danish king Valdemar Atterdag, biblical figures such as Herod, Cain, Gabriel, or even Lucifer himself, or an unidentified lost soul or spirit, either male, female, or non-gendered. So the stories of the hunt vary significantly. I have noticed that many, though not all, of the pagan blogs that talk about the Wild Hunt really push the narrative that it's Odin at the head of the hunt, and that it has always been Odin, and that the earliest historical documentation of the hunt claim that it was Odin. And nope, the oldest historical documentation of the hunt does not say that it's Odin. Now, I'm not saying that Odin is never the leader of the hunt, because in some stories he is, but he's certainly not the only one or the oldest attested one, just to be very clear. Moving right along. This is all complicated due to the existence of numerous nightly hosts, which became conflated and confused. These narratives often syncretize and merge before separating again, often bequeathing one or more elements to the narratives to which they are temporarily connected. This is due in part to the nature of mankind to share and evolve stories together and to find common elements and blur cultural boundaries, but it's also due to the medieval church. Both the demonization of and the angelification of the Wild Hunt are due to the medieval church either attempting to vilify the practices of non-Christians or to spackle them over with Christian figures. The Interpretatio Christiana overlays and overshadows many of the ancient elements of the story, reshaping the narrative in the dogma of what became the dominant religion. Unfortunately, the neo-pagan writers who attempted to reconstruct the pre-Christian narrative often did so in a fashion that either, from what I can tell and from what other historians can tell, just straight up made up details, or that threw away those elements that they considered too disturbing, which unfortunately is an attitude that is far too frequent among many researchers who strive to make the text say what those people already believe to be the truth, or who strive to make the narrative appealing to the masses. Something to keep an eye out for is I'm trying to find the right word for this that's not insulting. There's a tendency of marginalized and oppressed communities, specifically minority communities, to want to make their practices acceptable to the dominant majority culture. And so there is a sterilization of various elements in order to essentially say, like, hey, please don't penalize us. Please do not prosecute us. That's not the right word.
Persecute?
Yeah. Please don't penalize us, please don't persecute us, please do not continue withholding your recognition of the legitimacy of our faith-based perspective. Look at us, we're actually very similar to you, and we don't do any of that icky stuff that you think we do. Except in some cases, that icky stuff absolutely was part of the culture, and the sterilization in order to seek legitimization often doesn't work anyway. The whole "we're kissing your boots, so please stop kicking us" thing doesn't often work. Moving right along. Reconstructing the older versions of the Wild Hunt isn't easy. The accounts are never firsthand, and most often went through 3 stages of transmission. First, the accounts were oral. The predominant culture of the area before the Romans arrived, before the Christianization of Rome, before the clergy were writing anything down, they were oral accounts. Next, those oral accounts are written down. Then the accounts eventually go from the written version back into the oral tradition, which is because of where and when this was occurring. That third form of transmission from written record by the clergy back into oral tradition in the form of like sermons and people reading aloud and people passing down these books was reinterpreted through the lens of an evolving culture, an increasingly Christianized evolving culture. The new oral tradition, consisting of rehashed and reformulated beliefs and legends, often partially conserved the Christian message. What might appear to a modern historian as a genuine original folk belief could very well have emerged from a combination of the oral accounts from the pre-Christian culture with the scriptures, scholarly literature, and sermons of the Christians who came in and attempted to convert the population. Due to the efforts of the church to alter the folk beliefs of the regions, the bulk of the accounts of the Wild Hunt are from clergy and almost certainly contain many distortions of the true nature of what was being recorded. The clergy had an agenda. When they write about something, they are either attempting to push their agenda, or they're keeping their own accounts. They're writing letters to each other about things, or they're keeping journals, and those have the lens of their Christian faith that they're viewing the folk traditions through. So, for example, a clergy person might say, the locals all believe that this is happening, and that's them recording the oral account. And from my perspective, what's really happening is that the devil is masquerading as these figures and the locals are being fooled. So I'm going to write a sermon about how it's really the devil. And then the local culture says, oh, okay, well, I guess it's a devilry figure, like it's a figure associated with devilry. And then that gets passed down, and then you have someone saying that this figure is a god and also a devil. You see how that can evolve? And you get modern pagans saying, oh, well, it was a demonic-like figure. Was it, though? Because from that journal of the clergy person, they said the original oral tradition claimed it was such and such figure, but we believe that that's really the devil masquerading as that figure. So the reconstruction is best served by looking at the records that the clergy kept for themselves, or where they argued back and forth with other clergy, not what they taught to the populace, and then looking at the modern oral account and sorting out what looks like it may have descended down through the centuries and sort of reconstructing based on the journals and the oral traditions. And even then, it's guesswork. It's guesswork. Cultural anthropology often is. Right, moving right along. The earliest surviving written records of the Wild Hunt. The legions of the Wild Hunt were sometimes composed of the living, a horde of witches who had left their bodies behind to ride in spirit form in a hunt led by various figures: Diana, Danu, Herodias, Satya, Dame Abund, Perkt, also called Perkta or Hole. Sometimes they gathered the dead, revenants, or damned souls who could find no rest to ride along with them. This is seen in the versions of Mesni Heliquin, Oscorea, and Asgard's Rhea. The first instance of the belief in the Ladies of the Night as the Wild Hunt comes from a canon attributed to the Council of Ancrea, which met in 314 CE. But that canon didn't actually make an appearance until 872 CE in the Capitularies of Charles the Bald, who lived from the 13th of June 823 CE to the 6th of October 877 CE, a 9th century king of West Francia, king of Italy, and emperor of the Carolingian Empire. As a side note, just because of historical interest, he wasn't bald. It was either a reference to him having a lot of hair or not having a lot of land. So this is sort of disagreed with. He was either called bald sort of ironically, or it was about the fact that all of his older brothers had inherited his family's holdings and he was bald of land. Anyway, it was picked up anew in 899 CE in a treatise by Regino, the abbot of Prum, who lived from 842 CE to 915 CE. Quote, "This also is not to be omitted, that certain wicked women, turned back to Satan, seduced by demonic illusions and phantasms, believe of themselves and profess to ride upon certain beasts in the nighttime hours with Diana, the goddess of the pagan, or Herodias, and an innumerable multitude of women, and to traverse great spaces of the earth in the silence of the dead of night, and to be subject to her laws as of a lady, and on fixed nights to be called to her service." Another very old text, known as the Canon Episcopi, was inserted into the canon in 1066 CE by Burchard of Worms, who lived from circa 950 to 965 CE to August 20th, 1025 CE, the bishop of the imperial city of Worms in the Holy Roman Empire. In his decretum, which is fascinating, and I really encourage anyone who is interested in the accounts of witchcraft from this era, read the decretum, because I like loaves of bread baked on women's asses as love spells. That kind of stuff is in the decretum. He offered evidence that the church attacked an allegedly pagan belief that was still vigorous enough, still popular enough to be viewed as dangerous. Quote, "Have you believed what many women, turning back to Satan, believe and affirm to be true, as you imagine in the silence of the night when you have gone to bed and your husband lies in your bosom, that while you are in bodily form, you can go out by closed doors and are able to cross the spaces of the world with others deceived by like error and without visible weapons, slay persons who have been baptized and redeemed by the blood of Christ." Burchard recorded the belief certain women possessed the ability to propel flesh and blood doubles of themselves to roam for great distances, allowing them to commit what he referred to as evil deeds, killing people, eating them, placing pieces of wood or straw in the place of their hearts, and then reanimating them as victims of their mental control. He said, quote, "Have you believed, as certain women are accustomed to believe, to wit that by virtue of other limbs provided you by the devil, you have crossed in the silence of the quiet night through closed doors to fly into the clouds, where you have waged battle on others, both inflicting and receiving wounds." These women who roamed the night are found again in the Benandanti folk custom of the 16th and 17th century in Friuli, northeastern Italy. Italian historian Carlo Ginzburg, then of the University of Bologna, published a book in 1966 CE exploring the trial accounts of those Benandante who were interrogated and tried by the Roman Inquisition, using such accounts to elicit evidence for the beliefs and practices of the Benandante. The women stated that they participated in nocturnal visionary journeys during which they believed that their spirits traveled out of their bodies and into the countryside, where they would do battle with other malevolent witches who threatened the local crops. Ginzburg went on to examine how the Inquisition came to believe that the Benandanti were witches themselves, and ultimately persecuted them out of existence. There are many parallels with similar visionary traditions surrounding the earliest legends of the Wild Hunt. In one portion of the document, Burchard recorded that the women of the Wild Hunt rode with the leading figure of Herodias, a princess of the Herodian dynasty of Judea during the time of the Roman Empire. Legend connected Herodias with John the Baptist's execution. In another, he said it was Diana who led this wild hunt made up of women. In another place, he said that the women rode with Holda, or the benevolent one. Quote, "Have you believed that there is any woman who can do that which some, deceived by the devil, affirm that they must do of necessity or by his command, to wit with a host of devils transformed into the likenesses of women, she who common folly calls Holda, must ride on certain beasts during special nights and be counted as members of the company of demons." Burchard seemed to lack an understanding of the ancient Scandinavian concept of Hymir, which we might refer to now in sort of our modern context as an animus or spiritus. This aspect of the soul is considered to be able to quit the body while the body is sleeping, or while the body is in a coma or trance, or while it is afflicted by a serious illness. It can then go about in the form of an animal or human. The clerics were unable to grasp this cultural concept, and so they attributed the stories of people whose double had rejoined their bodies to a trick of the devil. The Diana that Burchard recorded is almost certainly not the same as the Roman Diana whose cult Margaret Alice Murray, who lived from the 13th of July 1863 to the 13th of November 1963 CE, an Anglo-Indian Egyptologist, archaeologist, anthropologist, historian, and folklorist, claimed survived into the Middle Ages. Saint Martin of Braga, in Latin Martinus Bracarensis, who lived from circa 520 to 580 CE, the Archbishop of Bracara Augusta in Galancia, now Braga in Portugal, a missionary, monastic founder, and an ecclesiastical author, claimed that this Diana is a sylvan and rural goddess worshipped by 5th and 6th century peasants. The Diana in both accounts is actually almost certainly a mis- or reinterpretation of Danu, also called Diana or Anu. Diana was regularly portrayed as the ruler of the fairy kingdom in demonological literature, such as King James VI of Scotland's Daemonology, which was published in 1599 CE, which says that she belongs to, quote, The fourth kind of spirits, which by the Gentiles, meaning non-Jews, was called Diana and her wandering court, and amongst us is called fairy, as I told you, or our good neighbors, end quote. Early Christian writers demonized the goddess of Diana of Rome and Danu of the Germanic people in one fell swoop, while also conflating two figures who were really only superficially similar. The question remains as to whether Danu led the wild hunt in older oral legends that predate Bouchard writing about them, because that's what can be assumed from these accounts. These clergy members are saying there are people who believe that there is this wild hunt led by these female divine figures, and that people are able to project themselves out of their body to go right along with it, and this is an evil practice and it's bad and it's actually the devil masquerading. And they're almost certainly conflating figures that shouldn't be conflated. They're treating the pre-Christian Diana of Rome and Danu of the Germanic regions as the same goddess, and they're not. But we can still look at this and say, okay, so these writings say that this belief was prevalent, that it was so prevalent that they were preaching against it, and that eventually the Inquisition sought it out and persecuted it. Herodias is also described as a flying deity in the Yzangrimas, a 12th century work attributed to Nevardus, who also referred to her by the name Feraldis, I think that's correct, and who explained how she was condemned to travel through the air. Quote, "And the Virgin Feraldis, condemned to unjust punishment by a saint, Herod was famous because of this child, and could have been happy thanks to her, but an unhappy love was also the misfortune of this young woman. This virgin burned to share the bed of John the Baptist, and had vowed to give herself to no other man but he. Her father, having discovered his daughter's passion, became angry, and he cruelly ordered the innocent saint decapitated. In despair, the young woman asked to see the severed head, and one of the king's servants bore it to her on a platter. She tenderly clasped it between her arms and bathed it in her tears, which she wished to accompany with her kisses. The head fled from her embrace and repelled her by blowing at her, and she was carried off by the opening made in the roof by the whirlwind, exhaled by the saint. Since that time, she has been pursued through the empty reaches of the sky by the anger of St. John the Baptist in the form of his breath, because he dwelled too fixedly upon the past. Dead, he tormented her, and alive, he did not return her love. Yet fate did not let her die entirely. Honors sweetened her mourning, and respect softened her punishment. 1/3 of humanity serves this afflicted sovereign who rests upon the oaks and hazel trees during the second half of the night until the final crow of the black cock. Today her name is Feraldis. She was formerly known as Herodias." This version of her legend is also found in Spain, where Herodias was given the same posthumous punishment. De la danza era a que esten canonenses la Herodias por la muerte del Bautista, the aerial dance to which Herodias was condemned for having caused the death of John the Baptist. Le Roman de Ysengrin, by an anonymous author, and translated by Elizabeth Carboneria, noted that the nocturnal journey of Herodias is reminiscent of witches who ride through the sky. Ratherius, also Rathier or rather of Verona, who lived from 890 CE to 970 CE, a teacher, writer, and bishop, in 890 AD in Liege, Belgium, wrote that 1/3 of humanity, par hominium meste tertius certiut here, left their bodies to ride with Herodias. Le Roman de la Rose, The Romance of the Rose, a medieval poem in Old French styled as an allegorical dream vision, finished by Jean de Meun around 1280 CE, says of this same account, quote, "Many people's senses deceive them, and they believe they are witches, wandering the night with Dame Abond. And they say that one of every 3 children of this land exhibit this condition and go forth 3 nights a week wherever fate takes them, entering into houses, for neither locks nor bars can stop their passage, and they can enter through a chink or cat-hole. Their souls can quit their bodies, and they accompany the good ladies into other places and into other houses while their bodies remain in bed." John of Salisbury, who lived from 1115 CE to 1180 CE, who was among the foremost philosophers of the so-called 12th century Renaissance, contributed to the development of political and moral philosophy, as well as the medieval theory of education, and to the dissemination of emerging Aristotelian learning, knew of this story of Herodias and repeated it in his work Polycraticus in 217. Quote, "They claim that a Noctiluca or Herodias or a witch ruler of the night convokes nocturnal assemblies at which they feast and riot and carry out other rites, where some are punished and others rewarded according to their merits. Moreover, infants are set out for Lamias and appear to be cut up into pieces, eaten, and gluttonously stuffed into the witches' stomachs. Then, through mercy of the witch ruler, they are returned to their cradles. Who could be so blind as not to see in all this a pure manifestation of wickedness created by sporting demons? Indeed, it is obvious that it is only poor women and simple-minded kinds of men who enter into these beliefs." End quote. John of Salisbury merged beliefs regarding the Lamia, who, along with the other ladies of the night, Herodias, Abundia, and Satia, are said in these legends to devour children. Thanks to William of Auvergne, who lived from 1180 CE to 1249 CE, and Gervas of Tilbury, circa 1152 CE to 1221 CE, we do in fact know that the Lamia were thought to be strega that entered houses in the dead of night to feed on little children. So they conflated these two figures, Lamia and witches of these cultures. So I want to go back a little bit and talk about the aforementioned Decretum by Burchard of Worms, which was compiled sometime between 1008 and 1012 CE, because it contained within it the Decretum Gratiani, also known as the Concordia Discordantium Canonum, or simply as the Decretum, a collection of canon law compiled and written in the 12th century as a legal textbook by the jurist known as Gratian, a canon lawyer from Bologna who flourished in the mid-12th century. The Decretum Gratiani was an important source for historians on the folk beliefs and surviving customs in Francia on the eve of the formulation of the Holy Roman Empire. The folk beliefs described in the text reflect the residue, the remnants of the pre-Christian beliefs of the area 1 century after the Carolingian Empire had been Christianized. Its condemnation of the beliefs in what was essentially interpreted as witchcraft were an important argument used by the opponents of the witch trials during the 16th century, such as Johann Weyer. The wild hunt is pretty extensively covered within this work. The Decretum Gratiani is sort of where we get our full understanding that there was an idea, that there was a group of women who would leave their bodies behind and ride through the night sky in the company of a witch or a goddess or a witch queen, and it is also from this that it became super demonized through the decalogues and catechetical works of the entire Middle Ages, before taking a prominent place in the manuals of the inquisitors who targeted people during the witch hunts. In his De Universale, William of Auvergne, who lived from circa 1180 to 90 to 1249 CE, who was the Bishop of Paris from 1228 CE until his death in 1249 CE, indulged in a sharp critique of the non-Christian rites and beliefs that were widespread in his century. And of course, he too spoke of these nocturnal hosts. Quote, "The same is true of the spirit that, under the guise of a woman who, in the company of others, visits homes and services at night, she is named Satia from satiety and also Dame Abonde, because of the abundance she bestows upon the dwelling places that she visits. It is this very kind of spirit that the old women call the ladies, and in regard to whom they maintain this error in which they alone give credence, even in delusional dreams. They say that these ladies consume the food and drink they find in homes without consuming them entirely, nor even reduce their quantity, especially if the dishes holding food are left uncovered and the containers holding drink are left uncorked when left out for the night. But if they find these containers covered or closed or corked, they will not touch either food or drink. And this is the reason why the ladies abandon these houses to woe and ill fortunes without bestowing either satiety or abundance upon them." So we see documented the idea that not only are people believing that they leave their bodies behind and join this hunt that rides across the sky, and that this hunt is led by these various female figures, but also that they leave out food offerings for them, that they believe that if they uncover dishes of food and leave them out overnight, these figures are able to take the energy of the food without actually taking the physical form of the food out of the house. Now that's interesting because we think of that sometimes as sort of a modern pagan concept. The idea that if you leave out an offering, they eat it without physically eating it, but it's actually a very, very old belief. And William then went on to scold the foolishness of women with the help of a theme familiar to the clerical records of the time. Quote, "It is our old women who, through lack of wisdom, have in astonishing fashion spread this detestable belief that they have maintained and fixed almost ineradicably in the minds of other women. It is especially women whom they have persuaded in the existence of the ladies of the night and their beneficial qualities, as well as of the attribution of great good to the houses said ladies frequent." So we see this theme familiar through these works, that women are teaching other women that there is a host that rides through the sky led by a female figure that they themselves can join if they project their spirit out of their body, and that if they leave offerings for this host, their homes will be blessed with good fortune. The wild hunt as a host of ladies of the night is also found in the southeastern Germanic regions, in South Germany, where it borders France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, where the leader of this host is referred to just by a different name. Basically, the records are the same, only the leader of the host's name changes. And in that region, the leader of the host is referred to as Perkt or Perkta. Berthold of Regensburg, also called Ratisbon, who lived from circa 1210 to 1272 CE, who was a Franciscan of the monastery of Ratisbon and one of the most powerful preachers of repentance in the 13th century, violently condemned the beliefs of the Bavarians and commanded his flock in a Latin sermon, quote, "You should not believe that all in the people who wander at night," who he refers to as Nachtwaren, "and their fellows, no more than the benevolent ones," who he referred to as the holden, and the malevolent ones, the unholden, in fairies, who he refers to as Hilwitzin. In Nightmares, who he refers to as Maren and Truten of both sexes. In the Ladies of the Night, who he refers to as Natvruwowen. In Nocturnal Spirits, or those who travel by writing this or that, they are all demons, nor should you prepare the table anymore for the blessed ladies, who he refers to as Felices Dominae. This last sentence is also explained in another sermon. Quote, "The foolish peasant women indeed believe that the ladies of the night and night-walking spirits visit their homes, and they set a table for them." So again, we see in this region where the figure is Perkta, the idea that there are otherworldly fellows, nocturnal spirits that ride through the sky, and that certain people are able to project their spirits right along with them, and that people leave them offerings. It's being condemned, but by being condemned, it is also being documented. Around 1350 CE, an anonymous pamphlet titled Mirror of Souls, not to be confused with the work of the same name written by the preacher and inquisitor Martin of Amberg, connected the night-riding women of this version of the Wild Hunt with Epiphany, and named the woman who was said to visit these homes. Quote, "Sinning also are they who, on the night of Epiphany, leave food and drink upon their table, so that all shall smile upon them over the coming year, and good luck will grace them in all things. Therefore also sinning are those who offer food to Perkt, and red snails or shoes to the howler, called Scrot, or to the nightmare." So here we have someone condemning the leaving of food and drink on what was considered Epiphany, so January 6th, out for the host of Perkt, who is riding with the nightmare host. In medieval Christian writings, the authors often associated Perkt or Perkta with Abundia and Satya, so they conflated them. They considered them the same being. Thomas von Hasselbach, who lived from circa 1420 to 1464 CE, professor of theology at the University of Vienna, called the leader of the hunt of the night-riding women by various names: Habundia, Pinzin, Sac-Semper, and Sacria. Pinzin is also the personification of Thursday. Sac-Semper is considered a bogeyman-like figure, and a member of the Christmas processions, as well as the personification of Sempertag, which falls through the 8 days after Epiphany. The Dominican Johannes Herold, who died in 1468 CE, incorporated Perkt and the belief in Perkt or Perkta into Diana, and a penitential, inspired in part by Burchard of Worms De Crystales, stated that Perkt and the Perkai, the Fates, are the same figure, or were the same figure. Among the numerous accounts that came out of the later Middle Ages, that of the Thesaurus Pauperum from 1468 most clearly acted as though Diana and Abundia and Satya and Perkt are all the same figure. Quote, "The second type of superstition is the idolatrous custom of those who leave out vessels filled with food and drink at night, intended for the ladies expected to visit, Dame Abundia and Satya, or as the people call her, Frau Perkt or Perktum, because this lady always comes with her retinue. They leave these out so when they find these dishes holding food and drink in open sight, they will later refill them and grant abundance and riches upon the household. Many believe that these ladies, led by Frau Perkt, will visit their homes during the holy nights between the birth of Jesus and the night of Epiphany. There are many who leave out upon their tables during these nights bread, cheese, milk, eggs, wine, water, and foodstuff of all sorts, as well as spoons, plates, cups, knives, and other similar objects, with the visit of Frau Percht and her troop in mind. Their hope is this lady will find it pleasant there, and consequently look with favor on the prosperity of the household and the conduct of its temporal affairs. Okay, again, Percht or Perchta is said to be traveling from what we know this person would have been referring to as December 25th to January 6th with a host of beings, and people are leaving offerings out for this host of beings, hoping that they will leave abundance for the family in thanks or reward for the offerings. Leaving containers open is a clearly non-Christian custom, as according to the Bible and various sermons from this time period, quote, "And every open vessel which hath no covering bound on it is unclean," end quote, Numbers 19:15. The historian and writer Johannes Praetorius, who lived from 1630 to 1680 CE, who studied at Leipzig University, who also obtained the role of magister, noted, quote, "Diana travels on Christmas night with her furious band of warriors," end quote. Later, he stated that Dame Hole or Holda began wandering on Christmas night, which underscores that the medieval Christian writers blended these figures together with little distinction. They essentially just treated them all as if they were the same thing. Now, what's interesting is, were they? Or did various regions have their own female figure that they had at the host that's not necessarily the exact same figure? Or was the belief that each of these figures could ride at the head of the host depending upon the night? Unfortunately, we don't know, because the records just treated it all as if it was a mishmash, all the same thing. The most detailed texts all agree on the date this ritual occurs, between Christmas night and Epiphany, that is within the 12-day Christmas cycle, when it is said that spirits have free reign to leave the other world and wander around the earth performing various tasks. Almost every single record of the Wild Hunt has the Wild Hunt moving around during that time period. So from anywhere around December 15th all the way to January 6th. Now in Ireland, it actually starts earlier than that. Their version of the Wild Hunt starts riding on Samhain. So keep that in mind. We can also see that the stories of the time acted as if, should the visitors be satisfied with the food offerings, they would bring prosperity and fertility to the household. This continues what we've already discussed through the class series, the idea that the date foreshadowed what would happen over the new year. The rite accrues greater meaning for us once we know that the Romans also celebrated something similar. Setting a table during this time of year was a religious rite connected to ancestor worship, for the dead were considered the dispensers of fertility and fruitfulness for both the soil, the livestock, and for people in general. In Rome, this table was known as the Table of Souls, or the Table of the Deceased. This custom was observed throughout the Middle Ages and is described in a large amount of literature by the clergy and scholars of the time. It is mentioned by Cesare of Arles, who died 542 CE, Saint Boniface, who lived from 675 CE to 754 CE, the Pseudo-Augustine, who was from the 8th century, Otto de Vercelli, who died in 960 CE, Yves de Chartres, who died in 1040 CE, and the aforementioned Gratian, amongst others. The canonists and clerics note that offerings or gifts were placed on the set table, mensas cum dapibus vel epulis in domibus preparare. Bleh. Sometimes the rite is referred to by two words, menses ornare. A Munich manuscript from the Aldersbach Monastery actually referred to all of this as garnishing the table for Perkt. Okay, so that is a very small portion of what I have written on the Wild Hunt, but I think that that's where we're going to stop for today. I want to stop on sort of the idea that this is a troop of wild women that are led by some kind of a goddess figure or divine female figure, if not necessarily a goddess, and that people can project themselves to join them, and that they are left offerings by people who hope they will be rewarded with abundance. And then I'm going to pick up on how that ties in to the belief in otherworldly beings, the Fae, the good neighbors, the elves, and how the hunt over time came to be believed to be led by a male figure. First one and then the other, and how it also came to be considered a troop of devils, or a troop of the dead, or a troop of angels, because all of those are also part of the belief in this. So I will pick back up on this and go into even more depth on how this has evolved, but this is where it started. Thank you all for tuning in. Please remember to like and subscribe to our channel, and please consider becoming a patron, because patrons do gain access to exclusive content, including these notes. Anyway, be safe out there, everyone, and whatever you celebrate, whether it's already done for the year, whether it hasn't happened yet, I hope you had or have a good one.